1, 2, 3. There we go. Hello. Welcome if you're joining us online. Apologies, there is a slight delay in starting. We will be with you as soon as possible. Those of you who have encountered me before will not be surprised by this.
We can always start and then they can start coming.
All right. I think we're going to make a start. I'm just going to put the clock on. I'm going to assume that because we're starting a little bit late, that we're going to go for the full hour and not stop at 5 o'clock on the dot. So let me just get a clock up and running here.
Well,
there we go.
well, I need a mic. It's on the table.
Torben's going to introduce.
Only one mic. I will hold it in my hand. Of course, I would like to welcome you both here in Bloxhub in downtown Copenhagen and you online. Should be okay. It's not okay? Well, I'll start again. A warm welcome from me on behalf of Bloxhub and the team. I'm Torben Klitgaard, CEO in Bloxhub. Welcome to you all here present on this hot summer day outside. I was just told Copenhagen is bursting with activities this weekend. The 3 days of design, the Helle concerts, and also the Copenhagen Sprint, which is a new innovation within the cycling world of actually bringing the world's best cyclists to Copenhagen. But I think in my book, the best part of this weekend is going to be the panel debate that we will introduce to you in just a few seconds. A personal note, I attended the Folkemøde in Denmark just last week, and there was the notion on geopolitics was on everybody's lips at the Folkemøde at Bornholm last week. But no one was really talking about the crossover to urban development and urban innovation in the future. And that's why we, of course, thought it would be great, because we today luckily have our three panelists in the house at the same time. I'm going to move over here. Michela, Magas, a warm welcome, and just being elected to the Bloxhub board. So thank you so much for onboarding. On behalf of the chair, I say that. And on behalf of me and the Bloxhub team, of course, Helle Søholt, our chair, thank you so much also for being here. And then Indy, of course, Indy Johar from Dark Matter Labs, leaving our board now, but we're not going to say goodbye. We're just going to say see you in the future. See you in August, yeah. And then lastly, of course, thank you so much, Andrew, for you taking part in this also. You've said, yes, I would like to moderate. So thank you so much for taking that stick and moderate the debate this afternoon.
Fantastic.
So with that introduction, no further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Torben, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. And a round of applause. This is a fantastic place. So for those who don't know me, and that would be almost everybody in this room, but there will be a few online that are familiar with me and will not be surprised by the fact that we're running late. I'm Andrew Dubber. I'm the director of something called MTF Labs. I'm not an architect. I'm not an urban designer, nor do I play one on television. I am a professor of innovation, and I run innovation labs around the world. That's kind of how I come at this. And co-creation. Those kind of There's a lot more to it, but that's the shortest way to describe it. I'm incredibly happy to be invited to do this. I think it was Jack Renteria. Where are you, Jack? You said something about the Canadian ambassador coming here to this place and having the sense of curiosity and awe and being sort of overwhelmed by how fabulous it is. If you get the chance to come to Bloxhub, those online, please do. It's phenomenal. I walked into this space and I think it's really an incredible place. So our panelists today have been introduced to you briefly, I should say are some of the most brilliant people I've met, which is why I'd like to get most of my talking out of the way right up front so that I don't suffer by comparison. We have with us Indy Johar, who is the Executive Director of Dark Matter Labs. Very warm welcome. We have Helle Søholt, who is the Chair of the Board of Bloxhub, but also the CEO of Gehl Architects. Welcome. And Michela Magas, who is the Director of Research and Innovation at the Industry Commons Foundation and brand new Blocks Hub board member. Welcome. If you are joining us online and you can find a chat window somewhere, please say hi. And if you happen to live in or near a city, if you could just type in which one, we'd be really interested to find out which that is. And I believe we have some MTFers in there as well. So it's really great to have you with us. So we're here today to talk about urban development and urban innovation in an era of geopolitical change. And I'm going to say that again, geopolitical change. That seems like an understatement. I've heard the term omni-crisis as a possible description of it. I'm going to start, Indy, with you. If we could give you the unenviable task of telling us the current state of the world and the place of cities in that context. And we'll give you 5 to 10 minutes to sort of lay out your stall on that front, please.
Yeah. Firstly, an honour to be here, and thank you for the invitation. Gosh, it's such a big question in so many different ways right now. I think cities are on the front line of the crisis right now in multiple levels. Our cities have been built through an idea of material abundance, energy abundance. Both those realities are unwinding. So, most of Europe cannot factually afford to build any of the grand housing schemes that it often talks about. Every architect goes around saying we're going to build a timber house, but actually we're nowhere close to the embodied carbon reductions that we need. So, all of Europe, I think, can afford to build about 144,000 homes total. All of Europe. UK is attempting to build 350,000 by itself, let alone Germany, let alone everyone else. So, we're living in an age of systemic constraint, which we're largely ignoring. We're living in an age where actually we're going to see massive energy inequality. Every city claims it's going to be electrifying. We don't actually have the copper supply to do the electrification. We have the total amount of copper in the world, but actually the supply of copper to be able to actually make copper, that takes another 10 years to build a mine. We don't have those mines. At the same time, if you look at energy demand, it's not going down, it's going up, both in terms of energy, sort of the re-industrialization of parts of the West, but also data centers, compute as a whole. So we're seeing a fundamental shift. At the same time, the value of being human is diminishing. So all of our theory of value of being human, all our cities are constructed on a theory of combinatorial value of being humans. Some, all the kind of beautiful stuff that happened in the urban renaissance, all of that stuff was built on this idea of coffee culture, somehow building new forms of productivity, and all that productivity being really important for cities. Well, actually, most of that stuff is now unwinding. So if you look at middle-class wages, they've largely stagnated. I think that economy of work is being undermined and will be undermined. What we're seeing is return on assets doing this and return on labour largely stagnating. So I think the cities are in the middle of a crisis where actually the kind of service and managerial economy that gave birth to it is actually being unwound. At the same time, our material economies don't exist. So we're living in a kind of an illusion of the 2004 economy of cities, and I don't think we've done the deep reinvention work of what that future looks like. So I think those are some of the kind of conditions that are driving it. At the same time, the number one discourse right now is security. And I don't mean this kind of kinetic sense. I also mean energy, food, water, critical minerals, all the way up to information systems. So we're seeing the security discourse displace actually fundamentally the kind of discourse that we've had around net zero cities. And that security discourse will increase because baseline volatility is now increasing and is degenerative. So not a good news story is what I'm here to tell you. At the same time, the reality is environmental conditions are operating in the horizon that, we're looking at 3 degrees global temperature rise, probably, if not more. 3 degrees temperature rise, we basically use one of the major food baskets at 1.7 degrees. So we're theoretically at least 1.3, if not 1.5, just to say how close we are. I think one of the biggest questions we have is, do we preserve the social contract? How quickly does the social contract get undermined? You don't have to get to food crises. What you have to get to is food costs going high enough that you lose the social contract. You lose the social contract, most of your asset value sort of diminishes. Remember in the 1970s, most cities were hellholes because you couldn't afford the police costs, the insurance costs, and all those environments. The rich and the people that could afford it had vacated to rural environments because they wanted independence. Like they wanted autonomy, self-sovereignty, security individually. So I think it's worth just looking at the trends. We are all living in an age of a bubble of a particular idea of the city. And I think that bubble of the idea of the city is over. And the question is, what is the new idea, and where is it born? What's the nature of it? So that's kind of where I sort of, and you know, I go back to the 3 degrees. 3 degrees means 5 degrees on land, means that cities, urban environments, is 8 degrees warmer. So places like Madrid, which we're working in, they're looking at 8.5 degrees warmer. What does 8.5 degree warmer mean? Your rails no longer work. They're more likely to break down. Your sort of supply chains are problematic. Your transformers break down more often. Your tarmac is being undermined, all the way through to your, you know, number of domestic violence increases, a number of people falling asleep in the wheels in the morning in terms of accidents increase in the system. All these things start to go up. Right? I'm not even talking about any of the hard stuff. We can, you know, number of people, GDP declines, cognitive performance is operated at a particular level. So there's kind of very clear cognitive zones which are operating at certain temperature levels. All those things become problematic. So when we talk about the geopolitics of this, I would almost say it's the geobiological politics that we're operating in, and what are the risks and what are the factors. And my fundamental plea in the opening of this conversation is, can we really get appropriately radical? I still think we're trying to fulfill late 20th century desires with old supply. So we're building, you know, going from petrol cars to electric cars, sort of houses to houses with solar panels on them, and that just doesn't get us home. And so my hard question is, what is the radical reimagination required to actually operate in that reality? And I think there's a fundamentally different type of world and different way of thinking about it. And I've not even talked about AI. I've not even talked about sort of agentic capacities of the world, which I think is going to be massively powerful, but also a massive inequality driver, which is historically what these technologies have historically done. UAE, if you're in the UAE, every citizen of UAE now gets access to ChatGPT Plus as a free service. Right? And remember, ChatGPT is effectively a one-to-one compute against energy. So energy inequality, you're going to see that. Compute inequality, cognitive inequality. All of these things are cascading. So that's where I probably see kind of like, I think there's a kind of real more fundamental questions on the table, which I think require deep imagination. And the solutions of them are operating at different scales. So the issue is not how much nature you have in cities. I'm going to be really difficult. Like everyone goes, oh, love nature. I was like, great. The issue is, how do you reduce 8.5 degrees temperature? That's the issue. You need nature in it. You will need to think about it in that way, but the objectives are there. The issue is, how do you build the collective intelligence of a city? It's not about whether you're smart or whether you're smart or whether you're smart. What is the collective intelligence of a city? That's more likely the asset in play. Third, what's the utilization rate of your material economy? How much of your matter is lying empty, vacant? And what's the density of your material utilization rate? How efficient are you with the carbon that you have in your table? How do you get to an abundant energy economy, which actually creates a surplus for some of these things, which I think is also going to be on the table. So I think there's whole new classes of assets, whole new classes. How do you operate into a post-labor economy? Every business here is pretty much operating in the theory of labor. Work 9 to 5, you get paid something, right? It's operating in the theory of how do you operate into a post-labor economy? What does it really mean to build a human economy, which I think is radically different and operates in a completely different financial compensation. It doesn't pay for your time because that's a labor theory. So we're going to have to release and build a new type of a human economy, which I think is fundamentally different. And what does that human-machine economy look like in the 21st century? What is the nature of machines? I think there's we wrote this thing about new machine logics based on doubt. Descartes didn't say, I think, therefore I am just. He said, I doubt, therefore I think, therefore I am. That's a more appropriate translation. So what does it mean to operate in doubt? And what do machine logics look like when you operate in doubt? And so I think this is a really fundamental transformation. And I'd really encourage us to both get deeply philosophical and deeply technical. And that's the hard bit, right? You get the whole bunch of people saying, just do it. They're irrelevant because they're just fulfilling late 20th century desires. but you need to operate between the philosophy and the technical capacity to do. And I think that leads you to unknowns. And I think how you operate in the unknown is the absolute necessity of what we need. And that's a different economy, different ways of operating. And in those worlds, consultancy doesn't work. Here's my provocation. Sure. Consultancy is shit for innovation. Right? Consultancy does not work for innovation because someone has to pre-configure the theory of where value lies and basically engages in that value. So how do you build an economy rooted in structural innovation? I think is a different economy. So how do you build that economy for that scale of innovation, that scale of infrastructural investment? I think that's the kind of hard questions that we're in the middle of.
Fantastic. Well, I look forward to addressing and solving all of those this afternoon. Helle. Excellent. We'll come to you very shortly. Helle, I'd like you to zoom in just a little bit from this sort of global context, because you work between Denmark and the US. And so there is a sort of a continental dimension to what you do. Do you want to talk about this from the point of view of the nation state and how that factors in it? And you have some nice branding here, so we'll get you to talk a little bit about Gehl as well, please.
Yeah, I'll give you just an overview in a sec about some of the topics that we are working with in the US. But just addressing this poly crisis or multi crisis or whatever we should call what you were talking about, Indy, I think is really, really challenging right now. And one thing that I think this geopolitical issue that we have right now, or tension change that we are seeing right now, is that many people are talking about the positive outcome of the conflict between Europe and the US. To be very frank, is the fact that the European countries are now coming together. So there is maybe an opportunity to really now to address some of these issues that you are pointing at here as well, Indy. In the country of Denmark, I've been the spokesperson for the new national architecture policy that we just handed over to the cultural minister just a couple of months ago. In this very building, we were fortunate to have 3 ministers on stage receiving this new policy, which is the first time I think we've ever had both the planning minister, the social housing minister, and the cultural minister on stage at the same time. But this is the fundamental radical collaboration that is needed now to make change. The 3 top headlines, you could say, for this new policy coming from Denmark, I think is actually headlines that we could use for many of the things that needs to be worked on. Indy, you touched upon already the first, the using fewer resources, working with what we have, transforming, buildings and making use of. Even looking at all the empty buildings that are out scattered around Denmark and the rest of Europe, how can we look at these buildings as a resource, as material bank, and what are the sort of circularity systems that we need to have in place to fundamentally look at the built environment differently? So there is something we need to do much less of, and that's the resources. Then there is actually the urban nature part and the biodiversity crisis and everything. We do need more urban green in our cities. And there is an opportunity right now to reformulate what that is. And I agree, I don't think we have sort of necessarily the image of what the perfect future city looks like, but there is an opportunity now to actually explore what is the future European city. And it has to be more green because there is so much more water, heat issues that we need to deal with. Basically, the infrastructure has to cope with so much more. We have an energy transition that we need to deal with in Europe as well, so that we are not so dependent on energy coming from Russia and other places. And we need to look at how these energy systems can be distributed much more locally. And then the final headline of this policy is really that all of this transition that we are in right now needs to be inclusive. It needs to provide quality for all. And basically the affordability crisis that we have. Rasmus, you talked about it at our recent general meeting, is something that is very present, and if not in Denmark, then certainly when we look across all the European cities. So I think the moment is now to actually make sure that the European cities can come together and actually start working on this agenda together, and BlocksUp facilitating the dialogue about the future or the next version of the Copenhagen model is one way of tapping into that agenda, and for the BlocksUp community actually to engage in that future dialogue. So that was a little bit on the, I guess, opportunity on the European side right now. On the American side, it's more tricky. We have about, this is just to give you an overview, that as a company, we're small. We're about 115, 120 people. We have about a third of our revenue from in the US, where we have a team of 40 people. We have 2 different offices over there, one in New York and one in San Francisco. We've been there for about 10 years now. And the types of clients and you could say topics that we work with is everything from, public sector work, where we do develop city visions and focus on really health, equity and sustainability in that just transition. We work with real estate developers, where we focus more on sort of nature-based solutions and mixed-use new developments, transforming a lot of brownfield sites, transforming retail areas. Every 4th mall in the US is basically closing down because the retail that, as we know it, is no longer there. We work with philanthropy a lot, where we sort of look into fostering this system change and developing much more social infrastructure. And then we work with enterprise clients like big companies like Google, where we help them become good neighbors and think more collaboratively about urban activation and urban innovation. And then higher ed, where we sort of connect climate action and urban development. So naturally, when working with these types of sectors, we touch all of these different topics in our work. So what we are experiencing right now is that, just the last couple of months, I've had 5 projects that have been closed down because they had something in them about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So federal programs are being closed down and projects are being closed down. Climate action work is being paused because the cities, the local governments are now being, reconsidering whether they can even call it a climate action plan. So documents are being recalled, and now many cities are actually now starting to consider, can we work with the word resiliency, because that's less of an issue for the current government. So it's actually super challenging to work in this political environment as it is right now. We have really brave foundations that are calling us up and sort of asking, how are you doing? And, is there any way that we can help and step in and actually, because they know that the federal funding is disappearing. So that's a positive thing that's happening. But it's a really, really difficult time right now in the US. Internally in our organization, maybe you say that innovation is not coming from consulting. I'm a consulting company, but or we are, but we have actually always been at Gehl at the sort of frontier of what urban strategy is about or should be about, and we've always had an explorative part of our portfolio of work, and we continue to do that. But it is difficult at a time where also the individual employee feels unsafe. And that is the reality. Our staff are worried about traveling, crossing the border to Canada, Mexico, going to South America for projects, and then having to re-enter. Many of our, we have about 24 different nationalities hired at Gehl, and most of our staff with foreign background are carrying their papers on them every single day to work because they're afraid of being in a raid. So it is it's quite quite a change, and I worry that we've only seen the top of the iceberg right now, because I think all of these constraints, all of these issues, all of these crises that Indy is talking to is also impacting the political landscape that is becoming even more divided. So I don't expect this to be sort of quickly over and done with, and then we'll see sort of a political rise and demonstrations and so forth, and then the government will go away. No, this is going to be worse. This is going to become worse, and we are trying to prepare ourselves for that. But it's a tricky time. So yeah.
Fantastic. There's lots to think about here and lots to talk about. Michela, I'm going to get you to come in if you want to grab the microphone. I'd like you to not just zoom in a geographical sense, but also to scroll back a little bit in time, because you were involved very early on, right from the beginning, in the New European Bauhaus Initiative. And so when your slides arrive,
might be.
I think they'll be there very shortly.
Carry on.
But I think if I could get you to talk a little bit about the New European Bauhaus, where it came from, what it was trying to do, and how we got to where we are now with it all.
Yeah. So yeah, I will go to that, even though I could really easily hook into some of the topics raised. Just very briefly before I start, so for example, how we think about the whole problem with translating. You said philosophy into technology. I'm actually interested in how we translate morality and ethics and our foundational values, societal values into technology. That's, I think, something that we can work on here, because we need to translate it from the ground up, from the experiments we do in the cities. So this is where cities become a template. I think this really works. And also, I mean, of course, I'm very familiar. I'm obviously not as experienced as you are in terms of working in the US, but what you're describing, and the experience that I've had, and make no mistake, this is filtering through to the fabric of all of our cities, because we have a huge amount of links to American corporates, and the problem is that it doesn't matter if your city is preserving values of inclusion, diversity, or whatever, but if your corporate who has a residence in your city gets a directive from the US to cut down on all those policies, and people start to behave according to different rules, they are integrated in the fabric of your city. They enter your city in that way. And then what are you going to do? And it is, some of the things that are happening are definitely comparable to 100 years ago. So I'm going to, and we must remember that, because the more you ignore them, the more they will advance. And I will have to reel back to something really positive here, because otherwise we will all end up kind of very depressed, as it's very easily kind of the risk these days. Something good did happen, and I think it has set the foundations for something that will be very resonant in the future. But I think I'm talking now about a leap into the future, several years ahead. So I'm not talking about the short-term political mandates that are actually like in 2-year cycles, because it takes you 2 years to get elected, and then you have 2 years to actually implement something, then you have to do another 2 years. So basically it's not even 4 years. And it's got even shorter, because political hype cycles have kind of hooked into the social media, which is super fast. And so it's very much about one-liners and about capturing attention. And so the short-termism has got even shorter. And I think with some of the foundations we have set up here, we are actually looking at a far longer period when this will be recognized as being the foundations of how we do things. So I was very privileged to be part of this group of people when we were gathered together to be part of President von der Leyen's high-level roundtable for the new European Bauhaus, and you will recognize some of the faces there. I want to show you what we did, because you've got 18 people there. They did put them together a little bit like the United Colours of Benetton, to be perfectly honest. I mean, it does come across a little bit as that. And so rather than being cynical about it, we actually rolled our sleeves up and we decided to do something about it. We weren't going to be just poster children. Besides, it's really difficult to get people from design architecture and from these kinds of professions, and these sorts of levels of expertise and these sort of levels of activism as well, to just be passive advisors. So they were up for a surprise in that sense. I'll show you what we did. Oh, that's reproducing very poorly, but never mind. The first thing we wanted to do was map our values, and because we were 18 people, and we're super busy, as you can imagine, I basically devised this kind of, I hacked into the Pecha Kucha format and decided that we were going to be 18 of us doing 1 minute, 3 slides each. Let's map our values. And the first thing we identified was a very strong line of justice that cut through all our values. We went back to foundational principles. And some of the things that came out as a result in the concept, which I coordinated for the European Bauhaus together with this group of people, was this kind of statement, which I think in what you two have just described could actually, comes across as awfully naive, and you could actually be forgiven for being very cynical about it. I love Alan Fletcher's cover of Domus magazine there from the 90s, Alan Fletcher being a genius of graphic design in the UK, that actually was entitled Architecture is Optimism. And we just have to tilt it like that. We'd have to tilt our perspective to that because, and I'll tell you why, it's not naive, it's the right way to do it. Because we had people on our high-level roundtable like Sheila Patel, an Indian architect who works with women's collectives in informal settlements. Millions of people live in cities in informal settlements. Where are they? And forgive me if you have introduced them into Danish curricula, but I'm not aware of many curricula who feature this as one of the central topics of architectural education today, for example. And she works directly with women's collectives about how you can enable a sustainable living and sustainable strategies in these environments as legitimate places to inhabit in cities. It's something to think about. If you don't approach it with that previous statement, how are you going to approach it? And we're talking, this is not going away. And temporary structures, so of course, the two people who just absolute gold on this high-level roundtable, of course, are the two people outside of Europe. Otherwise, we would just be so Eurocentric and so, we are so comfortable in our spaces here. We look at our kind of reuse of our cultural buildings or heritage buildings, etc. But really comfortable. And this is an element that Shigeru brought in at the moment that the Ukrainian crisis, or the war broke out, which we were warned about by the president actually before it did. In the first 2 weeks, and I just need to mention this, the first 2 weeks of the Ukrainian war, 2 million Ukrainians crossed the border into Poland. This is the same number as in the entire year of the Syrian refugee crisis, and not into Poland, this is into Europe. So you're talking about a scale that is very difficult for us to imagine, but what Shigeru did together with another architect, a Polish architect called Hubert Tramer, they went on the border with Poland. They took the Voluntary Architects Network trained them to build temporary shelters to ensure dignity for the people coming across. And one thing that we immediately discussed, I said, well, we can't think of these people we can't label them refugees. They are people with talent and intelligence who are coming into Europe, who should be integrated. There was an immediate thing that was passed, and I'm not saying because of anything I said, but it was obviously this sentiment was shared by some of the people in power. So basically they passed a resolution immediately that they would not be given a refugee status. They would be where there are jobs available, they were able to apply immediately. Completely different attitude to the immigrants. We can debate on whether the Syrian thing had different connotations. We can debate on we can compare and contrast, but still it was the right approach at that moment in time. Now the fact that some of the members of the high-level roundtable literally rolled their sleeves up, went and built this with their own hands, taught other people, and then it just replicated across all the way down into Slovakia. So, and they were built in Paris and in other places where people were incoming, and it made a fundamental change for families, of course, to have these the sense of decency. You want to empower people to that extent. Then just to mention, like, Shigeru was actually loading a plane with 50 stoves from Japan. I don't know why he had to import stoves from Japan, but they're dinky little things that he was carrying physically to Ukraine when the winter came. I mean, the fact that we were massaging idea into reality to that extent was a total surprise to the decision makers. It was like, what? You guys are supposed to just turn up and agree on something. So I'm so proud of some of these people. So one thing that I was happy to be able to pull off was exactly at that time when we were having crisis meetings about the Ukrainian war. I actually managed to gather the cohesion funds, Committee of the Regions, Interreg Europe, all the regional funding people, DG Grow, in a common space for the very first time. They never spoke to each other. Now, any of you who are familiar with the different funding schemes in Europe, you know that they can kind of suffer from projectification. They all kind of operate in a particular zone, and then once the project is finished, that's it, and there are no further impacts, and they suffer from that. The thing that we wanted to do was to actually create regional sparks like the ones that generated on the Polish border, and then concatenate funding instruments, agree on schemes where we could actually pick up the results of the initial experimentation in small groups and scale them through regional funding, and then scale them towards larger funding schemes. And this was agreed upon, and I'm very happy to say that the first thing that it led to, and this is a very long process, went through Parliament, went through completely new legal implementation. So actually push a new funding method or an instrument through, it's really hard work. People don't tend to do it, but this is the result of it. So basically, Boost for Small Municipalities has been a very successful launch, and it was the first result of this idea that you can generate greater value. The other thing we did when we were mapping things out was to look at outcomes and rules for a just transition. But the main thing was really learning through doing. This is something we all insisted on. And so things like these came up, and this is another Alan Fletcher from the 90s, which I absolutely love, which is, unless ideas are massaged into reality, they evaporate. I really stand by that. And this is the thing about prototyping on the ground, about cross-disciplinary collaboration, about experimental environments, something that will be familiar to lots of people linked to Bloxhub. And this led immediately to, it came from Anna Enberg, who's running the studio for Olafur Eliasson. Immediately push more than human ecosystems. This is really important. Of course, Olafur was doing all his installations at the time that were to do with bees and with ecosystems and things like that. But to actually push that through to policy is quite something, because you were talking about, at that time, something they called Industry 5.0. Oh, aren't we advanced? We're actually including humans in our discourse now. That was the innovation. Whereas we were talking about beyond humans. And so suddenly it spiraled. It actually pushed forward to industry having to speak about ecosystemic approaches, where they have to take into consideration broader environments. I think it caused a bit of some of this kind of pushback we're now getting. We say, actually, this is a pushback that you're describing. It's a fear of being spun into this new space where you have to actually think in much broader terms. And then quite a few of these large organizations go, hang on a minute, this is going to completely alienate our shareholders, etc., because it's disrupting our business model, etc., etc. So, but this got pushed into policy, and there were debates. And what we derived from that, and I mean New European Bauhaus, but my practice was, we launched something called, and those who are online watching from MTF Labs, ecosystem living as a strategy, which was, okay, ecosystem living is in response to urban planning or spatial planning, because what we want to do is actually think about the whole of living ecosystems, or think of strategies for living in ecosystemic terms. So it very much links to some of the things that have been presented earlier today about nature integrated into cities. So just a few pages from this book, because some of these are actually in this wonderful book where we feature desire as the project best practice. I've been a fan of desire ever since it started. There's no secret about that. Torben knows about it. Torben and Åsa were with us at CERN when we gathered the main thinkers, the main brains, the brilliant minds who were actually shaping the New European Bauhaus. So you've got desire on several pages in this book. These are some of the pages from the book, because it took inspiration from some of the original experiments. I mean, lots of experiments have been done for years by amazing practitioners. But then we said, okay, we got Jan Åman from Sweden to actually, together with Adam Davis from Britain, to create a prototype for an ecosystemic handbook. So I'll just give you a snapshot, a highlight. They converted the original Walter Gropius wheel into a new kind of wheel that actually looks at food systems and habitat and democracy and of course all of the things that we are concerned about today, as one of those things. That's one of the spreads about desire, which, as I say, is featured in here as a best practice, but also to show you how these wonderful lighthouses that have now been completed, the first round of amazing projects that were doing experiments on the ground, integrated nature in urban planning. This is from the neighborhoods project from Munich. And then we were looking at how do you translate that into technology, and how do you translate these values. So I'll just try and be faster, because obviously we're running out of time otherwise. But this is just an example of what happens when you rely on this. You asked, a year ago, as part of our labs, we asked ChatGPT to draw a couple where a woman was taller than the man. That's all we asked. Could not do it. No matter how many times we asked, could not do it. Now it's learned how to do it, of course, because it went a bit viral and people talked about it. And this idea of moment, it was desperate to try and somehow kind of draw something. And so this actually resonated with AstraZeneca, out of all people, and with what are now partners in a new trusted research environment for AI applications for health that we work on as a result of this. Because they just went, hang on a minute, if that's the case, what else is in there? One of the reasons why we create these communities that are multidisciplinary and that are really working across domains is because of the level of inspiration that, for example, industry can get. In this case, every single industry vertical that we had in the room, and I'm talking primary industry, I'm talking about the sort of industries that sort of, in some of these communities, we don't normally include in conversations because they are exploitative, they are old school, they're not based on equality or whatever. They onboarded this. this idea that came from Kat Austin, who's an artist, but as an artist works with science and technology. This idea ended up being discussed throughout the prototyping week that we ran last year. So basically, if you're interested in downloading this, it's free. It's just been organically downloaded. It's basically covering the first 4 years of and the story of the NEB. It's available to from, I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to be like Torben. I said, repeat after me. No, I'm not. But it's you just type that in and you can download it. It's been downloaded 300 plus times without any kind of publicity so far. So I'll be very, very happy to have your feedback on it, on what we've managed to do as a foundation for how you translate societal values into systems.
Very nicely plugged. Thank you. I'm going to anchor this back in the realm of cities because I think there's a presupposition in this conversation, or at least this topic, that cities are somehow independent from or in opposition to this global crisis that's going on. But there's an implication of cities. But where that becomes problematic for me, I live very, very far up in the north of Sweden, where the urban legend goes there are 50 words for snow. I feel like there should be 50 words for city, because when you talk about a city, you talk about Copenhagen, you talk about New York, you talk about Lagos, you talk about Wellington. These are almost different categories of things. So I wonder the extent to which any of this stuff, when we're talking about cities and urban innovation, urban design, how much of that is generalizable? How much of this can you say cities should do this in the face of a global crisis? Helle, do you want to come in on this? Because you advise at a city level, and is it different everywhere you do it, or can you say the same things and say, well, we did this in Copenhagen and it worked, so you should apply it here?
I just feel that what you're showing, Michela, is sort of it's positive, yes, but it's also sort of a very it's sort of an idea. I mean, the whole Desire project, but also very much the New European Bauhaus project is very much sort of a massive, small movement idea that you can change the world by connecting millions of small project dots. And I think our cities, we really need a new vision for the cities, and I don't know. I mean, the very sort of infrastructure-led actually model that Copenhagen has used. Yes, it's brought us to become the most livable city. We learned about that again yesterday. That Copenhagen is now again the most livable city in the world. But will we be the most resilient city in the world in the future? I don't know. I mean. I think we need to find new ways. I mean, we even talked about that in the board meeting today, Indy, and you actually, as I understood it, advocated for a very infrastructure-led approach. And to one extent, I agree, because we need the type of infrastructure investments that are needed. We have to think incredibly long term, because projects take 10, 20, 30 years to realize. But on the other hand, I'm searching for a new model, because I don't think the infrastructure-led approach, even the one we've used in Copenhagen, is going to be enough. It's not going to be able to cope with the social divides and the crises that we are seeing in the political divide and everything. So I myself and we at Gehl are searching for, I guess, a more, I don't know, I'm lacking the word, culture-led perhaps, or problem-led model. I don't know. I mean, at Gehl, we try to, yes, we have a methodology. We very much go out and ask people. We try to document their needs. We try to engage them in all kinds of ways. We look at both the tangible and the intangible values. and we try to build on what is there in terms of systems and biology and cultural heritage, not as stuff that is old, but heritage as living heritage. But I don't have the word for what city model is needed. First of all, I don't think we can model it down to one thing. Every single place is different. But I am, I guess, looking for a model that is the next model, which is, it cannot just be the infrastructure led. And it cannot only be the massive small where we are trying to connect a lot of small dots and small projects. I don't have the solution, but that's
I'm
what we
hoping
need
Indy
to
does.
discuss.
If you could pass the mic to Indy. Indy, it seems to me that there is limited value in being the most livable city in an unsurvivable world. And it feels like there has to be some, like you said, are we prepared to be, or do we have the capacity to be radical enough? Where is that bar, and how do we approach that?
Yeah, I mean, I was in Zurich a couple of days ago, walking past a piece of very expensive jewellery, and it was very beautiful. And the question I ended up asking myself was, behind that beauty was a whole set of violence. And we've created a beauty which is independent of that violence, and we're selling the beauty of that thing in ignorance, designed ignorance of that violence. Same thing, Copenhagen. Livable, but I think your per capita carbon is one of the highest in the world. So, sure, livable, making other people's lives unlivable. So, like, really? There's a kind of interesting moral question in there. Like, and I think there's a kind of hard question even in the aesthetic. And I think the aesthetic that we live in, the Scandic aesthetic, is actually this kind of synthetic beauty that willfully ignores the violence and the pollution behind it. And I think this is a hard challenge for us here. Like, what does it really mean to then construct into that reality? And in one sense, you could argue we have the privilege here to really design what is beauty now. And I'm using a soft word like beauty. And I think you have to design not the house, but the house and the forest together. You have to start to think about the systems to which these realities coexist in. I think you can see, if you look carefully now, you can see the shadow behind all of our beauty, and it's pretty fucking ugly. So what is the new desire? Let's use that word again. And how do we actually create that? I think is a really invitational challenge. So, and I'm not moralistic about this, kind of in a strange way. I think Copenhagen as a platform and also a responsibility to create that new future. And I think that's really interesting. But I certainly wouldn't, right now, be bragging about well-being city. Be like, shit, there's a fucking shadow behind that. And it's a shadow I'd be really taking account for. And I'd be talking about how do we resolve that shadow? And how do we turn ourselves to being systemically one of the most regenerative cities and places in the world, where Copenhagen actually regenerates more of the world systemically than anything else?
Well, I'm going to throw that question back at you. How do you imagine that sort of thing could be started?
Step by step, I think you have to sort of embrace almost a material zero future. You've got to be able to actually reduce your material consumption to virtually zero. I think Copenhagen needs to adopt a zero build future, straightforwardly. Secondly, it needs to then start to talk about new comfort standards, new energy standards, really start to shift how we choose to live. Thirdly, I think we have to start to build new forms of shared infrastructure, release material justice, and how material is held in Copenhagen. So if you're owning property that's lying empty, that's a real problem. We have to talk about spatial justice in different ways. I think then we have to start to get like all sorts of questions. Like, I don't know what's happened in Copenhagen, but certainly in many parts of the world, per square meter of inhabited space per person has massively jumped. So you've got 3 people living in 120 square meters. Is that cool? Is that cool? I don't know. I'm asking you. How much material is fair? What's the level of sufficiency that we should be living in? I don't know. And then I also think we have to create a new theory of abundance. What is the abundance of the future? It's not going to be all about sufficiency. I don't think you can create a future rooted in that. But you can create material sufficiency and perhaps release a new theory of abundance. And what is that new abundance? Abundance of creativity, abundance of care, abundance of tenderness, a new theory of kind of intangibles. What is that future? I think then we have to start to talk about really building regenerative supply chains. Then, and regenerative supply chains are a really difficult thing. Like my shirt, £45 shirt, is only made possible because I'm basically throwing out a whole bunch of waste into the world that's not being accounted for. So affordability and regeneration aren't the same thing. So if you were to total price this building, it's kind of maybe 5 times more expensive than it is now. You take a house, you times it by 5. At least 5, if not 10, if you total price it. So when you start to look at that reality, it starts to change all our material economics. So I think we're going to have to talk about material stewardship in different ways. We're going to have to talk about the carbon sequestration of, if you have timber materials, then you own 500 years worth of responsibility of storing and sequestering that timber. So there's a fundamental different material economics. Every one of these things are innovation spaces for me. And also to go back to Helle, your point about, I agree with you. I don't think the future is hard infrastructure. I think the future is almost certainly combinatorial, multiple portfolios of investments which work together to achieve a goal. And that's the same thing with whether it's, if you're building a tree canopy of a city, it isn't about the municipality planting those trees. What you want to grow is 650 odd urban forests built by the community. Much more powerful. But then the question is, what's the nature of organizing of the city? And that's where it gets really interesting. Even cities like Stockholm have breached their balance sheet capacity. They can't borrow anymore. Cities like Stockholm can't borrow anymore. So they are going to have to be able to pool liabilities and benefits together. So the city goes from what I'd call this city rooted in representation to city deeply organized in participation. So people are going to have to participate into that future. We have to reimagine the public-private contract. The public-private contract is not the bilateral relationship between 3 people. Public-private contract may be the bilateral relationship or multilateral relationship with 1,000 people. How do you construct many-to-many relationships into that format? How do you pool liabilities together into that framework? So it's a whole range of those organizational features that I think are really critical to be able to find the hybrid place between what I think both of you are talking about. There's a new intermediary in that middle, which I think is really interesting.
I want to flag up something that you said really quickly before I come to Michela. You mentioned in the middle of that, you talked about abundance, which I think is really interesting because a lot of people would hear what you say as being about restriction. And you would be very familiar with the concept of austerity as an approach, which might seem fiscally conservative, but societally irresponsible. And so to approach all of the things that you've talked about from a mindset of abundance, I think is a really interesting way of framing these sorts of ideas within the city context.
Yeah, some of it is abundance. Some of it is about, I think sufficiency is a very interesting term. And I think sufficiency and abundance simultaneously are different economic theories as well. So where is sufficiency the right approach? If you go back to the Edo period in Japan, Edo period in Japan, fully circular Japanese economy, built a whole economy around almost circular material kind of consumption and use and full virtually circularity. Extraordinary. So it built a whole culture around it. All the things that we revere about Japan in terms of broken glasses, that was all came from that moment in time. So I think there is a kind of material sufficiency culture, and we have to grow that, we have to build that, we have to respect that. At the same time, I think we have to talk about an abundance economy as well. And the abundance economy for me is already here. It's intangibles. If you're a startup, 80% of the wealth of a startup is intangibles. It's not your material assets. So how do we start to talk about the next intangibles economy? The collective intelligence of a city is an intangible. It's a function of investments, but it's an intangible asset. So I think we're going to start to think about what the intangibles of the 21st century are. So all the way through to living well together might be a very powerful intangible. So I think there's a kind of two-way story here. And I think we're going to have to construct the politics of abundance and construct the politics of sufficiency simultaneously. And I think that's a different type of economy, hardwired differently as well.
I really appreciate the fact that you said collective intelligence because it ties really nicely into something that Helle was talking about joining the dots of these on-the-ground projects. But I'm going to ask you to pass the mic to Michela.
Unless Helle wants to react to that.
No, specifically about these projects like Desire and Is the value in those the experiments on the ground and then doing more of those experiments on the ground and then connecting them with other experiments in other cities and trying to do this kind of very slow grassroots kind of thing, or is there more to it than that?
No, absolutely. So sorry, I mean, I have to kind of jump on that because it may come across as just a bunch of dots that are being joined together. The joining of the dots is valuable still. There is nothing wrong with in that sense, because if you are conducting those kinds of experiments, and if you get every single person who participates in these exercises to up their personal and project development, you're actually doing something really quite fundamental for society in that respect. The other thing I would say is, in terms of capacity building, it's not just learning the skills or the tools or whatever is part of this, but is what I've actually said to the Commission is that in the first 4 years of NEP, they've cultivated social mediators unlike ever before. Now, this is a diplomatic skill that can serve us in future years, and that's really desperately needed at this moment in time if you look at sort of what we're dealing with. So if we actually recognize what we're building with that, what kind of skills we're building with that, this can be the next. If we didn't have, if the whole European Parliament hadn't shifted over to this side, or rather on your side would be on this side, sort of to the right, and if we didn't have public servants who are resorting back to kind of top-down measures and are feeling threatened by some of these success stories, then we would probably populate right now sort of this environment with some of these social mediators whom we have cultivated. So that's one type of result which I think is not properly understood or noted, and I had to actually elaborate that to them, and now they started to include some of those people into panel sessions to talk about it and stuff like that. So I hope that from that perspective it's understood. But the other thing, I now have to kind of give you a practical example, because to say we can talk philosophically, we can kind of draw conclusions from the general kind of impressions of what's happening out there, or even from statistics and some of these consultants, agencies, analysis and what have you. But actually, I like to kind of, again, get my hands dirty. So let's give you one dot that we planted in the ground, and let me tell you what's happened to that since. And it was about translating what happens in real environments. So, and this was an exercise we did with a whole bunch of different people in the room, but mainly people from IKEA. So we had the IKEA head of ethics, head of digital product, head ontologist, and head knowledge owner. A knowledge owner knows the entire catalog. And the idea was, okay, so what we'll do is in 3 days, we'll actually prototype this thing where we want to replicate the experience of someone walking into a store and not being stalked by someone and trying to infer what they want to buy, but they actually go to an intelligent person and ask a couple of intelligent questions, right? And they're completely anonymous. They don't have to give their name away when they do that. So built a shell over their existing platform and hooked it to the new IKEA knowledge graph. And the most important thing for the owners of IKEA is time to market. So you have to consider the different interests of different people who run these organizations. You can't just march in and say, we are going to do an ethical thing. And why? You know, of course we want to be an ethical company, but we need to actually have some real tangible results that are meaningful to people. So time to market. Hooked it into the knowledge graph, person could enter anonymously. Of course, your browser, Chrome, will take your data. That's a different matter. But no GDPR pop-ups from IKEA. They don't want to take your data. You manage your own data. People who legislate GDPR, they don't consider these things. They just go, well, they just legislate with the past technologies that they are aware of. They don't actually look at solutions. So you end up with nasty GDPR pop-up buttons that are just useless to everybody. No GDPR pop-ups. So come in, get asked a couple of questions. Immediately it gives you the right kinds of answers. Now, time to market. You, as a customer, you want a new category thing or whatever. It might be a new category of room in case of IKEA. Sure. And you want to change you want to introduce a new category of thing. In the store, you would be counting on human intelligence to assist you. In an online environment, you need to hook it into the system, a new category thing. It would take them, this is according to IKEA, 6 months of retraining models in the cloud, of storing big data in the cloud, of an army of people working on this to actually introduce a new category. We did it in 1 afternoon. What happened as a result of ethical starting point of translating our decent human experience of everyday interaction into the digital was a huge saving of data carbon footprint. It's being rolled out across IKEA interglobal systems. It's not a dot in the ground. It is a big load of dots in the ground, if you like. IKEA interglobal systems is an enormous franchise. I just want to illustrate that each one of these dots, if you actually understand what you're doing, and if you understand the power of it, and you have the right players in the room. We had like the big advisors who advised the US government defense on ontologies. So we had best experts in the room, best brains in the room, plant the dot in the right place, and suddenly you have an enormous impact. And suddenly I'm going to have to get Indy to rephrase some of his stuff, because actually, in some of these respects, we have more than met the requirements. So it's about intelligence. Absolutely, it's about joining the dots. It's joining intelligence.
Okay, on that note, and I'm aware that we're at our hour, and there are so many things that I want to extract and talk about. And I'm sure there are going to be conversations that are going to go late into the night on the value of being human is diminishing, was a phrase that I noted down from Indy. And the question, can we get appropriately radical? To which my first response is, who is we? The idea of the national architecture policy, which I think is a really interesting concept, let alone implementation. Porting societal values into technology, I think, is really interesting. This idea of social mediators as well. So we can all talk about these things over a coffee or over drinks or whatever after this. But what I want to do is to sort of ask, given the people in the room and the people online, what is the takeaway? What can we not just talk about and think about? What can we do? What is our next step to walk away from this conversation and do something that might make a difference or that might change in a way that you think is a positive thing? Helle, I'm going to start with you, because you look like you have an answer to that.
No, I do think that the role of cities is enormously important because there is an innovation capacity at a local level that I strongly believe in. I think we need to think beyond the individual project and even the city as a whole. I think there is an innovation capacity at a neighborhood level that I think we should explore going forward. And then I very much agree with you, Michela, about we have to give people agency, and we have to find ways of giving agency to citizens, to organizations. And I think we are seeing a growth of the types of Blocks Hub-like organizations, because there is a need for sort of, you could say, neutral but also very knowledge-led companies to step in and take some of this role that the cities are not able to do themselves. Companies cannot drive themselves. Institutions like HOFOR, others here in the Copenhagen region cannot do themselves. So that's where I think we can see progress. Neighborhood level, giving people agency, and then finding these intermediate type organizations like Blocks Hub who can lead the way.
Fantastic. Indy, I'm going to get you to come in with your thoughts now. I almost want to ask you the supplementary question, can cities save the world? I'll leave that optional to you, because I want to hear a message of hope from you. But the question was, what should we, whatever we means, what should we then do as a result of this conversation?
My thing is just to look into the shadow. Like, I think, don't run away from it. Look into it. I think the most interesting questions are all in the shadow. And I worry that we kind of like the glitter, not the shadow. And I think the shadow is, the most interesting moment. So my thing would be kind of quoting a slightly weird book, but in praise of shadow right now.
Interesting. Okay. Michela.
Japanese.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So yeah, couldn't be happier to continue on this. I think that these cities in particular give us a really good template for to look into the public commons. Because on one side you have state-owned systems, and one immediately thinks of China as in really top-down and ownership by the state. On the other hand, you have commercial systems that actually most of the world is run through Google, which is a B2C advertising platform. But then there is this other area where I think there's a huge potential, which is the public commons. And cities can't survive, or good cities, livable cities like Copenhagen cannot survive without those. And I think there is some model to be derived from working within the public commons. Fantastic.
Indy, Helle, Michela, thank you so much for your time today. There is so much to unpack from this. I hope we get to do this again. Round of applause, please, for our fantastic panelists. Thank you. And thank you online for joining us. We hope to see you again soon. Thank you.